All right, welcome to Lions Guy Podcast. On today's episode, we've got Mr. Keith Flip Griffin, retired Command Master Chief of the Navy. And Flip's got many honorable credentials in his education and duty assignment. So I'm going to let him kind of tell his tale on that because it's too much to list in the intro here. But Flip and I have become fast friends regarding leadership and good reads and so on. So I'm excited to jump into this with him today and get after it. The topics are going to be wide and varying, probably around leadership, of course, but we're here to have some fun today. So Flip, welcome to the podcast and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
What's up, Dale? Thank you, man. I appreciate it, brother. I really do. It's exciting for me to be here and to kind of, explore this with you. I think you hit it on the head for the viewers and the listeners, man. I think it's we became friends real fast, and I think it's the same thing, right? We wear black shirts, we're tattooed, right? All the kind of things like true leaders really are about, but. Holiday season too. So can't forget to say happy holidays to everybody who's out there when they listen to this, coming up this week, they got big guys coming down the chimney. But for me, look, thanks for being here. I appreciate the opportunity. And, for me, it was, I was just from West Philadelphia, born and raised on the playground is where I spent most of my day. Right. No, so that's not, I guess that's
started to sound familiar real quick.
Yeah. Right. So our generation, but I'll give you my age right there. Right. I'll let that one go. But no, man, born and raised Buffalo, New York, and kind of suburbia kid. And deep roots there, like the 716 it's important to me. And Bills fan hardcore as I can be, Sabres fan hardcore as I can be, and so don't hold it against me. We haven't won anything from anybody, so nobody can hate on me for that thing. But I think born of two teachers, man, and I think that's where the love of kind of giving back when it talks about leadership, and I'll get into the rest of it, but. Did the college thing for a year, in Buffalo, didn't really work. I was a graphic design kid. My dad was a business teacher growing up. So what I didn't really realize is that I didn't really realize how much leadership was kind of born into me like a long time ago. My mom, I love her to death. And she had an epiphany about this crazy, man, probably about a year and a half ago. She had this, I don't know, overwhelming feeling. She wrote me a really beautiful note about that she had to do this scrapbook. And when she did it, I looked back and I had already been in this leadership reflection of my life. And I looked back at what she had given me, and she had kept when I went to leadership camps and stuff. And I'd know, right. There's so much stuff going on in your life. You forget, all the little,
and this was places. Stuff when you were a kid.
Yeah, when I was a kid. So my dad was a business teacher, and so I've been to leadership camps before with the business world in DECA, what they used to call DECA back in the day. And it was dormant, right? I didn't really realize it. And so then, after that year of college, I was like, what am I going to do with myself? And so I was like, man, this isn't for me right now. And I was an 80s kid, right? 80s in grades and 80s growing up. Right. So, I mean, it was, I was just like, okay, let's do this Navy thing. And so,
what did you think you were going to do? You're saying you're graphic artist. Were you like, what were you trying to do? You had websites and stuff, or comic books, or what?
It, man. Yeah, I think it was more. I knew I was going to be like marketing and whatever, because I could, I could sell a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves, right? That was what it was. And I had actually ran for the state presidency off of a whim because they asked me to. So everybody had these big lead ups for this DECA state president. I was already the Western New York president at the time for the association. And this is when I'm like a senior. And so I chose not to run. My dad was like the advisor for the Western New York state part of it. And so I was this huge, I could sell stuff, and I could, I was the first person ever to receive, and this is way crazy, but I received 50s on the kind of, there was a manual portion that you had to write and a test taking, which that's not the part I liked at all. But I was the one where I got in the room with actual business people and sell me this. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'll sell that to you. That's easy. That type of a thing. So I think, but I loved art. So that was the other part of the whole thing, was the graphic design was like this, but I got to school and it was like, let's go on the ink press. And I was like, hand cranking the wheel and coming home with ink on my shirt. And this is freshman year of college. I was like, this is not what I want. So the only class I really loved was like graphic design. So I ended up playing more ping pong than I did, and I was like, man, I got to get out of here, dude. So I was like, it's time for me. So I joined, and it wasn't even a question. I was like, I think, and this is weird to say after everything else, but I said this at my retirement, right? So it's not like I haven't told the world this, but I chose the Navy because I thought they did the least amount of push-ups. I was like, I ain't doing the Marines. Like, you're a Marine, right? And I ended up being like a corpsman. So it's like, totally for what I was going to get into no matter what. But I was like, I think they do the least amount of push-ups. I'm like, I'll go do that one. And like, it was just total 19-year-old kid, punk ass type of a, whatever. I had nothing on my shoulders at that point.
So
And so
what made you like? I mean, it's a big swing to go. I'm getting out of college and I'm going to go join the military, even though it was the Navy. Like, what? Why that? Like, was it like why did you go military from college instead of like something else or go to work or what?
so it's 96, right? So there's no like huge cause. Like the Gulf War is over, right? It's like we're in our downtrend, for recruiting and all that kind of stuff, right? We're not ramping up for 9/11 doesn't happen for another 5 years. And I think it was Clinton's second inauguration year in 96. And so I think, dude, honestly, I don't even know what it was. I think I was just, my grandfather was in, but I can't look at that as an influence because we never talked about it. It was never anything. My parents weren't in. I didn't have any lineage like to kind of do it. I honest to God, man, I don't know what it was that drove it to me. Who knows? I mean, there's probably some psychologists could probably dive deep in and find something that made me. But I think I was probably yearning for structure. That was probably one of the big things is that I was like, well, what can give it to me? Of course, mom's freaking out, like, oh my God, you're going to go and I'm like, Ma, we're from, how it goes with your, kids. And so I wish I had this, I said this before, like at my retirement, I wish I had this, like everybody from 9/11, like the recruiters had it easy after 9/11, like, and I'm not taking anything away from them, but people were lining up at their doors being like, dude, I want to go do something and get back. Right. I wish I had some of that. I kind of tell you that I'm in the generation of like the Top Gun Navy SEAL when it came out, with Charlie Sheen and Tom Cruise. Like I was in that generation that kind of got motivated by that kind of stuff. So I mean, those were some of the stuff that really brought it in, and it's like, well, what am I going to do this for? And oh man, I had to do. So I wish there was some super cause, but I just didn't. I had to get out. I think I needed to get out of my town. I knew I was doing some things I wasn't supposed to be doing, and I'm like, man, I need to get out of here.
Were you thinking you were going to be in for the long haul, or just do an enlistment and get out?
I don't really, honest to God, man. Like I look back now, and the funny thing is that I'm going through this. Like, so I have a 15-year-old daughter, and I'm starting to talk to her about college, and she's a freshman, and she's like freaking out, like. She's an Olympic level kind of soccer player. And so she needs to be thinking about it a little bit anyways. And she's just trying to be a kid. And so I'm trying to think back to myself and going, well, I was like, there's no way I was thinking about long-term. Like I was looking at like the Friday and what I was going to do. Like we all were back then, right? Like we were looking at what we were going to. So I was the same way. Like even the first years in the service, like I was thinking about the Friday and what party we were going to go to or what bar we were going to go to or what we were going to do. Like I didn't, it was a while. It took me a little bit of time to kind of mature as to where I was really going to go. It definitely, it took me a little while.
So what was your first assignment? Well, how'd you do a boot camp? So this all said, so were you athletic in school? Like what? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. So I was lettered. I actually went to States for the triathlon or pentathlon. And so I was a super, super athletic kid, did 3 sports a year. I was always into stuff, whatever, but ADHD kid, like when it wasn't cool. Right. So it was like, I drank. I tell everybody like I ate vegetables and I drank cranberry juice because like my parents like the Feingold diet because they thought sugar was like off the wall. So I never had the candies, never had any of that stuff, which is probably why I have a sweet tooth now. And so, but I was super athletic. I played every sport. what it was. Senior year, I really figured out that I really like track. I really like volleyball. So, and we had guys volleyball actually in New York. So it was we could play and play pretty athletic. But my parents weren't going to spend a lot of money on kind of sports. That just wasn't their thing. They're very frugal. Kind of grew up in that boomer era where they were thinking about those things, and which is fine. And I was never, my head was always over on every other sport. So they were like, well, he's not going to specialize anyway. So it was fine. It kind of worked out perfectly. So when I hit boot camp, I think, it wasn't a shock for me. I was okay with the, I knew from business about when to be professional and when not from being in DECA and my dad for all that. He was a very stoic kind of, still is very stoic. And, we kept things. And if you had a problem, we kind of dealt with them in the house. We didn't really, we didn't let air the business out and everything, which is that era, if that kind of a thing. And, but great, great childhood. I was an only kid growing up, which completely tells you a lot about me right from the start about it all. But boot camp it wasn't bad. I was good. I volunteered for things that I had to, and I kept saying dude. I would be like, oh, got it, dude, and I was just like crushed instead of saying like petty officer. So that was like so I got strong. Like later on we learned, like, if you're not if you're either strong or you're smart, like pick one of them because they're gonna figure it out.
So were you guys yes petty officer, no petty officer, or yes sir, no sir?
No, it was yes, sir. It was no yes petty officer, no petty officer.
Oh,
So I
okay.
had two first
I didn't know
classes.
that.
I didn't have a chief for mine. So we didn't do sir. You guys do sir to everybody back
Yeah.
then. So yeah, they make you confused because you have to like salute everywhere. So like, if you ever go to Great Lakes, like it's a huge, like obviously it's a huge complex, right, for boot camp. And like the roads, they're probably 5 lanes, but they're only two, but they're like 5 in size. And like people are saluting. I went back years later, like people are saluting at you from across the way, like, hello, morning, chief. I remember all that stuff. But like, they definitely wanted you to know. And it usually, they always got you because like you couldn't see the star or the 2 stars on top of on top of their rank. So you'd be like, good morning, chief. You'd be like, I'm a senior chief. You'd be like, oh my God, dude. Like, like, of course you were whatever back then, you didn't know, but I went back and I'm like, whatever. When I was the senior chief, it's like, whatever, we're all good, dude. Don't worry. But
That was
anyways,
one
so
of the toughest parts
good.
for me for boot camp was trying to learn all the freaking Navy ranks. And we had to learn the officers and the enlisted. And I was never on a naval based ship or anything. So I was never exposed to it. So yeah, I could never sink that stuff in.
Well, you guys had to learn ours, obviously, because you
As I was saying, well, you had to learn your ranks.
You guys are Department of the Navy. Let me get that jab in right now. But
Yeah.
we both beat the Army this year, so it doesn't matter in football. So, ha.
A lot of acquaintances happy about that. Yeah.
That's right. Yes, right. So, but no, it was good, and I got lucky, man. I went at the right time, just dumb luck, honestly. But I was over 6 foot tall. Had no acne, and I didn't, unlike now, need glasses. And so Clinton's inauguration, the Presidential Honor Guard was coming, and they were kind of soliciting to come to the Guard. And I just happened to be in what we used to call a 900 division in boot camp, which meant and we were a triple threat, which meant some of them were like just, let me see. So some of them were flags, some of them were something else, and then we were a triple threat. So we ended up being the band, the drill team, and the choir were all within one division. So we were Division 934, and so we had those 3. And so I played the tuba growing up. Like I did the trumpet, then the tuba. And so like they didn't have that. So I was like, well, I could beat a bass drum. And so I didn't have to be in a regular division because like, this is cool. And it ended up being, boot camp was boot camp, but I ended up getting kind of picked for the Guard. And then, so I went to DC instead of taking my normal job, which I was about to do, which was going to be on an aircraft carrier and a handler. I ended up going to the ceremonial guard instead in DC, and we got to stand so I got to do the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and I got to do funerals, and I didn't realize it at the time. It was super humbling though, to see all that stuff. We're standing there for, 6 hours at a time, sometimes or whatever. But like going to the funerals, to me, it hit me probably when I became E7 later on, about probably 15 years later. Like I look back on that and I can still to this day, like, without a doubt in my mind, I can recite, on behalf of the President of the United States, a grateful nation and a proud Navy, I present to you your national anthem for your loved ones' dedicated service to the armed forces. And I'll never forget that in my life to say it to grieving mothers. And
Mm.
it was really humbling. And I didn't even know it was I didn't know it was there when I was doing it. I didn't know the service we were really providing because, we'd get in the car and, you know, laugh it off like it was.
It
I
was
mean,
like
we
your
did.
job. You took it as your
Yeah,
job.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But the history. It was. You got to see all the tombs, and you got to see just. It was just so humbling, and to be on the tomb of the unknown soldier at the time, and to do a ceremony on that when I think it was South Korea laid a wreath or something. I mean, we had no we didn't realize the impact we were or what that would have on us. But it was really humbling. It was really cool. And the nice part about it is when you did that, you got to choose what you wanted to do afterwards. I kind of gave up that and then went the medical route, which is how I ended up being a hospital corpsman and kind of started that whole journey.
So when you say you got to pick what you wanted to do, does that mean MOS wise? You got to like go pick a different MOS, whatever?
Yeah, so one of the advantages is that you could go and whatever you were, if you wanted to stay that you could, but you gave a 2-year commitment is all it was to the guard. And at the end, if you wanted to choose a different, or what we would just call a rate, you could just choose a different rate if you wanted to. And so for us, it was because so Navy wise, right, we have different rates all over the place. You have a bosun's mate, you have a hospital corpsman, you have a culinary specialist, whatever you're going to be. And then within those would be what you guys would call your MOSs or what we used to call NECs or whatever. So that 8401 behind me, that was actually once I got into a corpsman rate, and then I became a hospital corpsman, and then after that, I did 2 years of that, and then I became a search and rescue guy. So that was what you guys would be calling an MOS is what we would
Mm-hmm.
call an NEC at the time. So ended up going I stayed in the DC area, so that was a big part of my life was DC because it was my first 2 duty stations back to back, and then got to go. So I had a lot of history straight from the start, right? Because DC is just full of everything. The museums and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, you're there. You're pretty close to that, so
Mm-hmm.
and then really then decided really I needed that kind of fire, and so I search and rescue it just happened to be '01, so it was the first NEC on the list. And so between recon, search and rescue, dive med tech, those are kind of the three that are kind of the special group of kids, if you will.
Mm.
And so I decided I wanted to go SAR. And so at the time, a lot different what it was now. It's not as structured. So you had to be an EMT already at the time for emergency medicine. And so I did that one while I was at Bethesda, and then rolled into SAR down in Puerto Rico, and which was, it was incredible, right? It was so much fun down there. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah.
And I guess, wow. What do you think? What were some, because you were in for what, 23 years, was it?
Almost 24.
And you've got a lot of diversity in the things you did. Like, what were some of like the more transformational moments for you throughout your enlistment?
Yeah, so obviously starting there was a big, it was we were spoiled, right? It was spoiled in Puerto Rico. You go out on the
Yeah.
beach whenever you want, right? It was so much fun.
How
We
long were
had
you there?
2.5,
Oh,
two and a
wow.
half. I met Katie there. Katie was also in, my wife, and so she was in at the time, and so it was kind of nice because so they closed her squadron down, and when you close a squadron down, maybe and in the other services they might do the same thing, but when you close a unit down in the Navy, the detailers will come and they'll actually detail you right there to almost, it used to be that they used to detail you to anything that was open. Well, we were married at the time, we had gotten married, and so I was just, they could write you in if you were. So she got orders to Whidbey Island in Washington State next, and so they just wrote me in to go to SAR up there, and that was, arguably the guys from Fallon will tell you that Fallon's the best. The guys from Yuma will tell you Yuma's the best. But the truth is that like Whidbey's, they're all unlike each other, but Whidbey's, one of the top duty stations to go to SAR. And I got lucky enough to be written in. Katie went to a squadron out there, and so I got written in. And Whidbey was eye opening because I went from the tropical islands of the Caribbean to the Pacific Northwest, and
Okay.
it was just, I mean, we're doing mountain rescues and doing just river rescues. I can remember, here's a good story, man. Like the first week I got there, it was the same aircraft, so I didn't have to get acclimated to a new aircraft. I can remember the first week being there. They're like, hey, we're going to go. All the rescue swimmers were like, we're going to go fishing. And I'm like, all right. They're like, hey, you want to go, Griff? And I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. So they start loading up the aircraft, and then they start loading their SAR gear and their wetsuits. And then there was like this, and they bring in these huge coolers. I'm like, oh, cool. And I can hear this clanging in the coolers. And I'm like, man, this is cool. And we go, and granted, search and rescue was not, it was like fifth on the list of things to do down in Puerto Rico. So there wasn't a lot of, it just like the Coast Guard got called first. There was like a couple, like we were kind of down on the list of priority wise, but Whidbey was like, that was it. Like Whidbey was it, right? They had the capabilities to do stuff. So these guys go out and they land on the river, and then they shut down the aircraft. And I was like, holy crap, what are we doing? And the swimmers start getting their suits on, and they're like, hey, Griff, put your suit on. I'm like, oh, okay. We shut down. They take baseball bats out of the coolers. They walk into the river, and they just start slamming salmon in the head with like baseball bats and throwing them in the coolers. And this is like fishing. And I'm like, oh my God, dude, this is so awesome. Like this was like it was just insane. Like that was how we did rescue swimmer fishing. So we were, that's what we were doing. And so it was an eye-opening tour. I like to say I had my aha moment in leadership, right? If you were to tell me and go back and, besides the leadership things that were already ingrained in me for a kid, like I had my aha moment when I was there. I got kind of picked I volunteered to lead the hospital corpsman ball. So the hospital corps has a huge following over 100 years of kind of being in service and being a corps. And I got put in charge of the ball. So it was a big deal. We hadn't had it in like 2 years up there. The Master Chief, Tracy Sherrill, I love her to death still to this day. She's kind of that inspiration who was like, go with it. She just empowered me, right? I didn't know what that, she just was like, go HM2, go. And then she started, yep, I don't care. Go ahead. Yeah, that sounds great. And I just kept going and going. And then I would be talking to her about it, and I'd get these little, I didn't realize it at the time, but she'd be giving these little leadership tidbits to me all the time about stuff. And, I'd walk in and say like dumb E5 stuff. I'd be like, why? You have like the smallest Master Chief office I've ever seen. And to her, she's like, I know. She's like, but it doesn't matter. And she would just, there was so many simple things that I didn't realize what was happening. And at that point, I think it just took off. Like 2006 happened. The war, had kicked off for 4 years. The Army had gotten overflowed with like work to do. So they were like, to that point, the only place I had, air quotes here, deployed was Puerto Rico. And they wouldn't allow us to go off and do anything while we were there because we were already, to them, forward deployed. So when, that hit, and then the air ambulance happened, and the Army called and said, dude, we can't handle this. Can the Navy come in and help us out with air ambulance? And so that kind of happened, and it really transformed me, I think, as a leader, of saying, all that stuff I was kind of heard about and starting to put into practice. Really, I mean, I went to war like that. I mean, all of it kind of really happened, and it was all being proven, right? All the stuff I had read and learned and thought about was all being proven at the time. So that was that moment at Whidbey Island was really my aha kind of transformational of it all coming together and going, okay, this is what I want to do. And then honestly though, I still didn't know because I was still learning. I was a journeyman at the time about leadership when I was at that point. I was just brand new to it. So
where'd you go? Did you go to Afghanistan, Iraq, both?
We went to Iraq, Kuwait, and then we were our job at the time was to do all the so everybody had to come into Kuwait before they went into Iraq to do all the training stuff. So we were assigned. The Army was funny, man. They were like because the Navy doesn't, and you guys, the Marines probably doesn't do it either. Like we consistently train whenever. So when we were there, we were still training, and they were like, "Why are you guys training still?" We're like, "What do you mean? Like this is what we do?" Because the Army's like, "No, no, 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 no. We train, then we go, and then we come home." Like we were like, "No, no, no. If we're like," I remember one time we had to ask permission to go over water to the general, and it was like, "Are you guys equipped to do that?" And we were like, "We're in the Navy, bro." like, of course. You know what I mean? Like, but they were like, "Why are you going over the wall? Why are you guys doing training missions?" And we're like, "Because we don't stop. Like, we just always, if you're running a 2 aircraft line on an aircraft carrier, one's running for SAR during the day, and the other one's a training one. So that other aircraft is going out doing training missions all day long, and we didn't stop that when we went to over land, and it was just funny if that mentality of like, dude, if we ain't, we're just always training. And so it kind of, but we controlled all of southern Iraq and then all of Kuwait. So everything that was there, even if it came down from Baghdad to Talil and then, or wherever it was going to come, we kind of got all those things from there. So.
Yeah. So were you doing SAR out of Kuwait into southern Iraq, basically? Am I understanding it properly?
More medevac. So that mission was strictly medevac. So we were taking, whether it was hospital to transport to go to Germany to the big aircraft. There was a big roll 4, I think it was called. And don't get me wrong, or don't quote me on that, but I forgot what the rolls were called at this point. But we were taking them to more definitive care, what it was, whether that was on a transport to go to Germany. We were using our helos to do that. So we got a bunch of red time or green time and to be able to cross borders and do stuff which kind of counted. So it wasn't, I wish it was more. We did a bunch of point of injury stuff and some big things, but it was a lot. I'll never classify it as kind of the one time I think our flares went off because we thought we were getting stuff. We hadn't. I'll never kind of discredit the guys who were bullets were flying by stuff. So
sure, like as far as engagement's concerned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
where'd the nickname Flip come from?
That's a good one. So after as you move up in rank, you get to E7. So E7 in the Navy is the only one that kind of, they really treat it completely different than any other rank. It's an enlisted side. So you go through a pretty big transformation and very much initiation process. And it's really a leadership initiation is what it is. And so it's changed over the years, right? In the very beginning of it, dude, they were, making you, measure the Chiefs mess with a hot dog, and then they would smash it and tell you to eat it. And so back in the days, it was bad stuff. It has transformed into something now that it's really about learning about time management, learning about prioritization, learning about kind of really leadership and what it means that, when you wear the anchor, you're representing everybody. And it's never happened like that before. To get to that point, there was a lot of like one-upsmanship of trying to be in the club, as you say, you're knocking on the door, but we never, it was, you're either, we changed uniforms completely, right? Our uniforms now look like more like officers versus what they used to be. You're right. You get your khakis before they had the black and tans that they do now. And so it is a big deal for that thing. And so love my mentors. I'd gotten to rescue swimmer school. So from Whidbey Island, I went to Japan. I opened up the first SAR Corpsman shop over on the USS Kitty Hawk and HS-14, and then got chosen to go to rescue swimmer school. And one of my lifelong mentors was there, and he was kind of he was kind of legend and lore in the search and rescue world. And I love Dave to death, and I got to relieve him. And so when this is exactly how it happened. Like results were coming out, and back then they didn't release them on Facebook. They didn't release them on Twitter or whatever. You had to log into the system and see, and you just kept refreshing your system, take your CAT card out, refresh it and see if the results were out, whatever. We didn't have dates. We just thought it would be coming out around this time. Well, anyways, Dave, that's a good story. Dave looks at his phone. I found out I made it all great. They told me, I'm like, Dave, there's a meet and greet today. He's like, yeah, man. And Dave, like, I said, hey, dude, what time do we need to go? Well, I was at Rescue Swimmer School, so we wore shorts and t-shirts that's what our uniform was. So we came in work in shorts, t-shirts, and flip-flops. You can already see where this is going to go. And Dave, literally, man, I swear, he had to do this. And Dave's smooth and relaxed as a cool as a cucumber, anyways. He picks up the phone. This is my red stapler, and he's like, uh huh. And he turns to me as calmly as he can, and he's like, "Yeah, man, we're just all going like we are. It's going to be at 4:30 is the meet and greet, but just show up, like how you are." So, like a good little first class man, I show up 15 minutes early, but I didn't know anybody because I had just gotten there to the command, and so I'm like, I don't know anybody, and so I'm waiting, and now I'm like, the 15 minutes early, late type thing. I'm like, it's like 5 minutes till, and I'm like, I gotta start walking in. So I start walking in and I see this group, right? I see this group over huddled all together over on the sides. And they're like, so the distinct difference back then, you wore what we used to call NWUs and the blueberry ones, the ones that were like the blue camouflage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the main difference between officers and junior enlisted, E6 and below, was that junior enlisted had silver of all their writings. And then chiefs and officers had gold. Well, I look at this group, dude, and of course they're all silver. And I'm like, shit. I'm like, I'm showing up in t-shirt and flip-flops, dude, right? And I'm like, here we go, dude. And I knew, but they didn't know who I was. So I went to like shake their hand, and I'm like, and of course they don't know. They're like, hello, I'm, Chief Select, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, hey, man, I'm also Chief Select. And as soon as I said it, they were like relieved. They were like, this dude didn't show up in a uniform. He's done. Well, my command had told the other guy too not to show up, show up in his flip flops and shorts because that's what we wore. And so, dude, we showed up and we had to meet like 400 brand new chiefs, and we were the only two not in uniform. We showed up in shorts and flip flops. So one of us got named Flip, one of us got named Flop, and it was yeah, dude. And I was originally Flop, and somehow they switched it, and nobody really knows how that happened. So rest of the time I was Flip, and my buddy Dave said to me, he goes, dude, you don't know how much of a favor I did for you. And it was true because they knew who I was. They knew the basis to the whole thing is this, right? And I think this is good for leadership in general, right? Everybody needs something, right? Some people are really good at whatever. Some people aren't good at other things in leadership, whatever those are, right? And you hire people to help you out with your weaknesses. And so that's what this was, right? We had people that were 6-year chiefs because they made it so fast and the rate just required, and they just were taking the test early. And we had 19-year chiefs, dude, right? Who were at the end of their thing, like they were about to retire, and all of a sudden, life just gave them an extra, 4 years or 6 years, whatever, or 4 years, right? So you're like, holy cow. So you really had to figure out. And so I was a leader at that point. So I knew how to lead. It wasn't that I was actually, what I needed to learn how to do was follow. And so Dave was like, this is going to help you follow, and people are going to know who you are. Of course they are. They're going to, and so it actually ended up being a blessing, and he knew it from the start that it was going to be a blessing for me to have a nickname and to kind of be like that. And so it was good. It helped me eat my humble pie, and it helped me learn how to follow up and really support the other people. So
yeah, no, that's awesome. Flip and flop.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had, and you've touched on it a little bit here, like we've had a number of chats about leadership, and I guess like in the topic of leadership, what's been some of your bigger influences in that area?
So when I was in Japan, I had a guy made senior chief, and he handed me a book. It was Powell's 13 Principles. And I didn't know it at the time, but I read it, and it, it was a guy I looked up to at the time, not only in stature, but I had gone to him for information about, I had 2 girls at the time. I just had a second child. And I'm like, how do you do this, man? Like, how do you deploy for 10 months and then leave your kids at home? And like, and I was going to him for that kind of advice. And he hands me this book about Powell, and dude, I was done. I was like, oh, give me this, dude. And I, it was probably the best book to get first, because if you haven't read it, and I don't mean you specifically, but for our listeners, his 13 principles are the most down to earth basic things you could ever, and he puts it in such a format that you're like, that is so palatable. It's so easy to just go, yeah, just, it's simplicity. And I think that was a huge driver for me of just, leadership is so dynamic. It's so diverse about how you do it. And I think, just the basic of it all, the simplicity of it all was what really just helped me kind of start the digestion of it all. And so, if you're planning on starting, where to look, like just read his 13. They're easy to digest. It's a simple thing. It covers things like ego. It covers things like, dude, just go to bed and let it rest. It'll be okay in the morning. Like, it covers those types of stuff that you're like, as complex as it is, it really boils down to simplicity. And then following that up, a bunch of them in between that was good. And what, of course, at this point in time, I'm really stuck on military leaders and reading things about, MacArthur and reading Patton stuff and all that kind of things. And then I was reading Mattis, and Mattis comes across the same way of just like, and one of the most eloquent speakers and learned people you'll ever meet in your entire life, right? No doubt that he got to where he was, but like, you read his things and how he handled his missions to go into the first wave, for Gulf War, and it's like, I want to be brilliant. I want my people to be brilliant on the basics, and you're like, what? And when you think about it, what the takeaway was is that, think of the most chaotic experience you could ever think about. And for people in the military, it's easy to think about war, even on the outside, some, the boardroom or some huge merger or whatever it is. And you go, okay, what is this all going to boil down to? And you're like, it's the basics, right? It's the basics of whatever. And his was, look, my Marines are going to be shooters, and they're going to be great shooters, and they're going to aim true. And then they're going to work on it as hard as they can about communication and making sure, because those are the basic things, right? And you're like, oh, and for communication, he put in things like skip echelon, which he learned from a British general, which was like, look, I don't need to talk to 16 people in between. I need to talk to the person on the ground, as a 4-star, I can talk to that person, and nobody in the middle is going to get butthurt. It's okay, right?
Yeah.
Because I need the information real hand and the most basic raw form of it. And that added to Powell's kind of simplicity of his stuff. And I was like, whoa, let's just work on the simple stuff. Like, if we just work on the simple things, like, everything else, I don't want to say automatic. Like, there's some really complex shit out there that people deal with.
Yeah.
And tech stuff, same stuff. But simplicity, like, boil it all down, right? I mean, the shortest answer, to get from A to B is the straight line. And I think that's how it is. And so those two guys really formed and shaped everything I started to learn, and everything I started to not only promote to the people that I had the privilege to lead, but to the people that were above me, and I was mentoring, right? My commanding officers and my department heads. I was like, hold on, don't complicate this. Let's just make it simple. What is it we need to do? And then the rest will, fine. If we get it, that's great. But it doesn't matter. The mission's going to get done if we get this done, and we're going to get it through. And you cut through the BS, right? And then you don't have to worry about, all the extra crap.
Do we sometimes we do, right? And I honor you for kind of saying that. I have always said, look, and I would tell people to me, look, I'm a keep it simple, stupid guy. Like, can we break this down into baby parts? And I don't know. I always try to, like, well, look, maybe I'm the dumb in the room. You guys are all smart. Break it down to crayon eating Marine level here for me so I can digest the thing. But it was always like, I don't know. It feels like, from a leadership perspective, sometimes we're complicating it for the wrong reasons. I feel like you want to start simple with with the clear next step, or the palatable, simple version, and let the complexities bring themselves to life, right? Like we imagine the necessity for all this added complexity, or it's ego, right? Or it's fear, of all these unknowns. So we start complicating things by compensating for all these imagined, like, supposed things that could happen. You know what I mean? Like you take on a project and like, oh, well, we got to do this and this and this, and we start like embellishing what could happen when really, like you said, it's really a simple effort. So let's like keep it simple and then only get as complex as determined as we go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so something you said that I is a big proponent of me. So I believe in my kind of one of my I have three core leadership things that I think is that I try to impress on people, and I'm actually hopefully by August I'm going to finish my book called K.I.S. Leadership, and it's that keep it simple. Except you said the word stupid. And so the only reason I bring that up is because so I think that we are now a generation of people that have power in our hands, right? To be not stupid, right? We can call people out on stuff. We can look things up in an instant. My kids have more power in their hands than Vietnam aircraft that were flying over Hanoi do, right? And that is absolutely true. And so I challenge people to change the word stupid to other words, right? Whether it's sincere, sensible, steady, strong, supportive, whatever, synergistic, whatever you want to take, and change your S and be keep it simple, but and then add the part that needs to be changed for yourself and keep it into something else, right? And so we talk about sugar and salt, and I did a post not too long ago, and I talk, leadership's about being a chef at times and balancing sugar and salt, about when do you need to use sugar, when do you need to use salt in a situation, and how much, and and when you get it wrong, it's going to come out tasting, like shit, right? All
Yeah.
these S words that we're throwing around, but I think it is that simple, I think, to be able to do. But as long as you keep it, I think everybody, right? The most time I've ever been nervous, I used to teach for the flight surgeons. I used to teach them about medevac. Excuse me, and I used to have to talk to them a little bit about. They went to med school, so who am I to sit there and talk to them about pneumothoraxes and the anatomy and physiology? They had way more in depth than I did. And those were the only times I was ever nervous about doing things. And what I didn't realize I would do then is that I would just keep it simple, right? Keep it simple. And when I would talk to them, I would simplify it. I was doing it partly because I knew they knew more than me. So I wasn't going to get into things, and then all of a sudden they ask a question of me, and me be like, I know you're smarter than me. I'm sorry. You have an MD. I don't. Right? I'm paramedic level guy, but okay. So I would do it on purpose, and what it ended up doing is that people just they knew we didn't have to get into the details and the minutia of things, and then all of a sudden we would get to the point of what we were talking about, which was about patient management in the field, right? Or whatever it was. It was about logistics of doing something. And I could get all that hard stuff, all that kind of really stuff that didn't matter. We could leave it alone, and it never clouded what we were trying to accomplish, right? And I think keeping it simple and then something else, not stupid. I think it's I think that's where it's at, right? When you boil war down, and when you boil, hard decisions that you're going to make, I think when you keep it simple, it's the right answer, right? I mean, we talk about, I'm a faith person, not a religious person, but you talk about just doing good unto others, and that's simplicity in itself, right? And
Mhm.
I think you've been a leader, right? You've been there at the table. Most decisions boil down to a very simple choice of what you're going to make, right? And there's a ton of information that you want to get beforehand that is very complex and could be complex, but it boils down to what? Simplicity, right? And so I think you have to be able to do that. I got a great book recently, finishing it up now. It's the Checklist Manifesto, and one of the things, the biggest takeaway I took from it is that it was like the most complex things, like the space station and astrofit. They all have these. The more you need simple checklist for those things to make sure you don't screw them up, right? And I looked back when I talked about simplicity, and I looked back at like CPR and the American Heart Association kind of leads it's the kind of Red Cross is there. You have one or two. Usually, the medical world plays more with the American Heart Association, and like 15 years ago, they were like in depth with like cardiac drugs and cardioversion and being able to remember everything and tubing people. And all of a sudden, they made this huge turn, and they was like, wait a minute, we need to go back to our basics and our simplest things about CPR, because that's what's keeping people alive. And there was science behind it, of course, but boiled it down, it was simpleness that did that, right? And to this day, if you go into a hospital and you hear something like a code blue, which is someone's having a heart attack or having a cardiac episode, you'll see someone standing there with a book, just thumbing through the checklist. That's all their job is to check everything off and keep it simple, because the things that people are doing are definitely not simple. So I think that's my first one has always been, and you hit it right on the head. It's being brilliant on your basic stuff and just keeping it simple.
Yeah, and I've always kind of like challenged the room when things are getting crazy. Like, things are going out in left field, right field, and everything in between. I always would bring it back and go, guys, time out. What are we solving for? And kind of bring it back, right? Because, especially when you're in these meetings and there's an issue, again, to me, it kind of goes back to this for various reasons, ego included. Like some people just want to chime in, and there's all kinds of like fallacies and techniques here that are happening when these things happen, but people want to chime in with these non-issues or non-relevant items, and it like spins the whole room out of control. From a leadership perspective, I would always kind of go back to, guys, time out. What are we solving for? Like, let's restate what we're here to solve for, and pause for a minute and then focus back on that, because that's what it comes down to. Because you get a lot of people in a room and things can just start spinning out of control with regard to like all these other, like I said, complexities, to your point. And it's something I think you're 100% right. It's like, keep it simple, and then you can have, right. We hear it all the time. You can then have those small victories, right? Because when you like look at a project, right, and you see the mountain that you need to climb, and the next step is the step right in front of you. But when you're looking at that whole, elephant you got to eat or mountain you got to climb, whatever, analogy you want to use, it really comes back to the simplicity of what is the sequence of steps that we've got to take to get there. And those are all usually pretty simple steps.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely, I think, and again, when the stuff hits the fan and the fires are up, and it's going to get like that, right? And you've prepared for it. You're boiling it down then to the most simplest of things, right? I mean, we talk about the hardest things that we do as leaders, and you're making hard decisions, right? But those hard decisions are either it's either right from wrong, which is easy, right? It's either right versus right, which is a very hard thing to do. Like, how are you going to bring that out? And wrong versus wrong is easy. It's like, great, they're two. I don't want either one of those, right? I mean, it's which finger am I going to stick into the light socket, right? I mean, which the top or the bottom one. Like, sometimes you got to eat that. You got to eat that one too up, and so. But they all boil down to those three. Like, pick one that it's going to be at, of how that's going to be, and you don't necessarily know. And I think just keeping it, just give me the basics, right? I mean, and how many times you've been in a room, right, when you were a younger in the cusp, and you were like, give me the details. That's all I need. I don't want the extras, right? And what are we doing? We're boiling that down. So you nailed that one.
Well, I think, and you're right too. And this is another point that even with clients today, I'll run into, which is you'll hear this stalling, and this indecisiveness. And I would go, hey, you know what the problem is? Tell me which one of these options is the wrong one. And we're like, well, neither one are wrong. Right. So whatever you got to do, flip a coin. Like at this point, because usually what happens is we're at a decision point, and we're trying to figure out what right from wrong, when the truth of the matter is you've got two rights. And and just boils down to like, you don't have enough information to know which one is right at this point, if there is one. So you have to pick and take that step, because that's where that clarity is going to come. And not even that you need to pivot or whatever, but unfortunately or fortunately, whatever, you've got the benefit of two right choices pick one and go. And that's where, I think maybe you didn't, but I gave that lecture on the Marine Corps leadership traits and principles. And one of the traits Marine Corps leadership is decisiveness, right? And that's, we have to be decisive, and sometimes it's going to be right or right. And don't be afraid for that fact. It is what it is.
And it's funny, right? We live in this brand new world now where, like, before COVID, change was like scary in some ways, right? And the word pivot, I think it was a word. I think it was a buzz year of the year of the word last year. I think is what I read, or maybe it was this year where it was somebody, and I don't know whether it's Roget's thesaurus. I forgot who puts it out, but the maybe it's Merriam-Webster puts out the words of the year, but pivot was on it, right? And it was because businesses were having to do this so much that it became. Well, if you think about that though now, as a leader or as a business person, take it into a business perspective. People used to be absolutely afraid if you used to be saying, we're going to pivot to something, right? People were like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. You didn't say you had a clear vision, and people clear vision down the road 3, 5, 10 years. And now all of a sudden we've accepted change so much. We've accepted things that is totally different, that we're like, hold on. If you're not ready to pivot, if you're not ready to be able to change when you need to, you're actually at a disadvantage than at other people's that can adapt, right? It's this adaptive world we live in business now, that if you're not ready for what could come, but I think as a leader, that's not as scary anymore, right? Because you don't have to then predict what's going to happen. If you could say, hey, listen, we're now ready for ABC, right? We're resilient. We have resiliency built in. We have change management built in. We have all these things ready. So if it does, we're ready for it. I think, dude, to me, that should be easy for a leader then, instead of saying, we're going this way, we're steaming ahead, here's what the numbers are going to show. Those days are gone. Like,
Yeah.
you better be ready to move and change and be okay with that. And that should be a wake up call to people, to be like, man, that makes me feel good. I don't have to predict the future anymore. We can just be ready to change and be okay with that.
Yeah, I think you've just got to be directionally accurate, right, to where you're trying to go, and have short-term objectives with a constant cadence of review and reflection. So that way you can go, hey, we're going to start marching this direction, over the course of the next week or month. These are the things that we're going to be doing. Hypothesize, hey, like, this is where I think that's going to lead us. And now have your, performance tracking, scorecard, KPIs, whatever it is, leading, lagging indicators, and like be able to measure the success of that decision on your way towards it, again, so you can pivot, because we don't know, right? Like, and I guess that's the hard part about leadership. You got to make the call, right? Make the call,
Right.
But make the call with the information you have, knowing that once you start taking action, once you start making moves, you're going to get more information that you
Right.
didn't have. And you've got to constantly review and reflect. Go, hey, we're heading this direction, or so we thought. These are the things we're doing. Yeah, my favorite is what's working, what's not working. This is working, this isn't working. Okay, so let's ante up on this and ante down on that, right? And keep marching towards with a steady cadence of your objectives, and get those, like we say, small victories underway towards the bigger, maybe ambiguous vision, right? You know where you want to go. You just aren't always going to know exactly how to get there before you just get started going.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me to my second kind of thing that I really look at, right? I don't fail, right? Ever. And when I say it, I always say it with an asterisk, right? Because failure is a word it's thrown around, and it's how do I put this? To me, it's a very hard word. Like, it's a hard point, right? It's a black and white word for me, where if you failed, then it's one thing. But the way I look at it is this, and I feel like, first of all, I feel like you have an obligation to learn. So that's tied to that whole thing, right? So if you learn something from a failure or a setback, whatever, then it's not in my eyes, it's not a failure. And we can have so many arguments about this, right? And I'll take the hardcore one. In combat, when you lose somebody, right, you can absolutely 100% say that was, and many people do say, well, we failed, right? Whatever that was, or we didn't complete the mission, or we didn't bring everybody home. But here's the thing. I don't know any of those missions, those things where people had sacrificed themselves that they signed up for to do. I don't think any of them would look down on us wherever they are and go, that what we did was a failure, right? I wouldn't want them to be thought about in that context. And here's the other thing. You don't come back from that and don't do a big debrief or a big lessons learned on that and go, you know what? We're never going to make that same mistake again. And this is how we save 200 people next time because that person sacrificed for that kind of lesson, right? And we've signed up for it. You know that. And and I know it's hard. That's a hard thing to swallow, but I truly feel like and it doesn't need to be immediate, right? And I think that's the other thing. You could make mistakes. You could quote unquote fail if you want, but if you want to call it that. But if you learn something from that, and you and even 5 years down the road, you go, man, I remember when that happened, and I'm never going to let that happen again. Well, then that, again, air quote, failure is not a failure. That's not a failure to me. So it's in the queue, right? If you make mistakes and you consider them failures, they're all they are to me is they're in a queue, and you have an obligation to learn from those things and go, I'm never going to make that mistake again. Or even better, I'm going to teach someone not to make the same mistake I did. And then it doesn't, in my view, it doesn't become a failure, right? It becomes a learning lesson. It becomes an object, a point of forward progression versus regression, right? Because if you do the same thing, and it could happen multiple times, it may take time to do. I get it, right? But these are complex stuff that we're doing, right? And I look back at Ennis, and what did he say? He said, like, I learned 999 times not how to make a light bulb, but on the
Yeah.
thousandth time I learned how to make a light bulb, right? And so I think it's along those lines where I'm like, you just don't fail. It's fine. It's fine if you make a mistake. It's fine if you get a setback. And you hear things like, "Well, we're going to fail fast and fail forward," and it's all good and gravy. And Mattis, again, I look back at Mattis, and he was like, "Marines don't even know how to spell the word failure." And I think he was trying to do a double there, but I think I got it. Like, I understood it, and I said, you know what, man, and at first I didn't believe it. Honest to God, that was when I was like, you have to fail because you can fail fast. You want to fail for, like, I believed all the other stuff. And then I started thinking back about learning and going, wait a minute. If you learn from that mistake, even if it's a comrade who fell during, died during a mission, you came back and you learned something about that, and you go, we're never going to do it like this again, right? We're never going to be that way, or we're going to think about these things that we didn't think about before, and we're going to make it so that it's not a failure. It becomes more than just a setback. It becomes a learning lesson, and if it becomes that, then it's, to me, that's not a failure. And so when I look at my life, and it's not an egotistical statement. I can't look at a lot of failures that I did because I tried to either pass on the lesson, which it doesn't become, and they didn't, or I tried to make sure that I didn't do it again, and I made corrections, and when it went forward. So that second one for me, it can be very controversial, and it's not about not making mistakes. You can do that 100%, and you gotta have an environment where you allow people to make them, right? But just have the obligation to learn from it attached to it, and then all of a sudden now you don't, you stay positive with it, because don't fail is kind of a positive thing in some respects, right? It's got huge, it's got very big kind of aspirations to it, but it's manageable if you think of it positively and go, man, all right, you know what, we screwed up. How are we going to do? We're never going to do it again. All right, great, let's move on. You know?
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's a good. I guess that answers to the fear of failure, right? It's a perspective to help you in that regard. And I think I was writing down as you're talking, like, I guess it goes down to the reasons for failure, right? Like, there can be unacceptable reasons for failure, such as like neglect of responsibilities, neglect of opportunity for preparedness, things like that, right? Like, from a leadership perspective, like, I could argue that, look, there's failures that come by way of those things, right? You had the time to prepare and you didn't, and things went flop. That's a failure. Now, to your point, there's a lesson to be learned there. The question is, as a leader, are you going to grow from that? Like, obviously, you had some growing to do, and you weren't proactive. It bit you, and so did you learn or didn't you learn? Like, I think that's the area still, like, that how many times are you going to fail before you kind of grow out of that type of thing? But to the other side of the coin on this, you're right. Like, you can't be afraid to fail. Just if you're doing the best that you can with the situation, the timing, the information, if you take account for, this is the best decision I can make right now, then go. And now you can, if you will, fail forward because you have taken the step, right? You've taken the action, you've made the decision, and let the results be what they are, because yes, you're going to at this point learn from it. So you didn't fail, you took action, and now you've got a result to learn from. Boom. Like, and let failure, not be your identity, but be your outcome, and decide what you're going to do with that outcome each and every
I
time.
mean, because think of it this way too: who can you really control?
You.
Yourself,
Yeah.
right? I mean, like you can't really control anybody else in the world. Like if you think about it, who has like I try to talk to my daughter all the time, right? And she's 15, and so I'm like, look, you can only but I used to tell this to everybody. I said, look, when you lay your head down at night, did you make the best decision you could? Right? If the answer is no, fix it. Right? Fix yourself. Don't make the same mistake and do better. But if you made the best choices, and they're not easy, this is wrong versus wrong, right versus right. Right? If you made the best choice with the information that you had, and that was what was done, then you got to be you got to be okay with it, right? I
Yeah.
took a 21st century leadership course, and we looked at some of the best military leaders that are out there, right? And you looked at them, and they were by far not, they were mavericks. They were not necessarily these very stoic, perfect people, right? Like read the thing, I mean, it just, Patton was not perfect in any way, shape, or form of how he handled things. MacArthur, same thing, right? You look at, look at our astronauts and look at, how John Glenn was portrayed as very, stoic and everything. And then look at Alan Shepard and who got to go up first and why, you know what I mean? Like if you just look at some of those things and go, nobody's going to be perfect. It's okay. It's fine. And you can only control you. And so if you lay your head down and go, I did the best things that I could with what the information I have. Now, here's the thing. Did you go out and try to find the most information you could? Well, that's again, who does it come back to? It comes back to you, right? So, and as a leader, it all falls upon who anyway? It falls upon you anyway as a leader. So you might as well lay your head down and go, well, I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna take it, good or bad. It's mine. I own it, right? Take that ownership of it. And I think that helps, in kind of in thinking about it all, right? If you think about it and go, well, you can't be afraid to fail if you don't think about failure, right? If you don't think about it, you're like, well, how can you be afraid of it? You're like, screw it. If we screw this up, guess what? We're just going to learn from it and move on. And so I think that's, I think that's just, maybe it's cavalier to think like that, but I just think that it's like, you know what? Life's going to go on, man. Like things are going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? I mean, how many people would have told you, would have sat on a podcast, on a radio show, whatever, and gone, dude, we're going to have this pandemic that's going to literally shut down our world. Nobody would have told you that, especially not in the United States, right? With all of our big trucks and all of our huge stakes and all the shit that we do in the United States. Like you would have been like, hell no, nobody's going to make me do. And then you're like, whoa, like that just happened.
Yep.
Like that's a big deal, And so, okay, how do we, I'm not going to fail. I just can't, so just don't think about it. But
Yeah, and I
so,
guess
yeah.
that goes where, a couple things too. And I think that's why, like, ego is such a great topic amongst, what good leadership is today, because, it seems to me like there's so much with regard to, like, leadership making a decision, and as we learn as we go, right? You make a decision, you learn as you go, but they double down. They go, "Well, I wasn't wrong." And we're going to keep pushing forward. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like they hold on
Yeah.
to that pride, and they don't want to admit that they were wrong, and take the opportunity to adjust, and they like just double down, keep marching forward to our detriment, right? Whether it's the followers or the impacted or whatever. So I think, one of the topics I enjoy reading about, presenting about, or whatever with regard to ego, these days is like it is such a detriment, in the area of leadership, and I would say even like mission accomplishment. And even, I don't know, as you were talking before too, I was thinking like, the indecisiveness as a result of being afraid what people are going to think of the outcome, and being fearful of, I don't know, because everything's on display anymore, right? Everyone's got a little freaking pocket-sized stage that they get to stand on and shout out the world their judgments or whatever. And I think there's a part of us that are perfectly human that kind of like isn't looking forward to that aspect of it, of leadership, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, because I think that comes with maybe a little bit of the servant leadership part, where that's a part of, there's a little bit of people pleasing in that too. We don't want to see things go wrong. So it's interesting times, for leadership for
I
sure.
just watched a great documentary on the Thai cave rescue of the boys, the boys soccer team, the wild boar soccer team, right? And it's absolutely fascinating. Like from a perspective of rescue, it absolutely insane, right? And so, if you've never thought about cave diving, and I don't know if you've ever done it, but it is probably one of the biggest things that would freak me out in my entire life to do. Like when I see them slipping through and they have to push through these like whatever, like it's insane to do that, right? But the great part about the documentary is it talks to Jonathan Volthan and Richard Stanton were the two guys that came in from the British Caving Council in the UK, and they were like they got there and they talk about them, and it's really cool because they give you a perspective of them cave diving and what it takes to be a cave diver, and they're all introverts. They're all these very much like, I don't like outside noise. Like this takes me to my beautiful place by myself. And then I thought about how much publicity around the world this got and where they became these absolute leaders to say we're going to get these people and we're not going to give up, and what the internal drive and the internal leadership was that they found, and they had done rescues before, and just to be, you talk about personal bubbles, you talk about everybody's got a stage. I think that community wants nothing to do with, like, that's why they're doing cave diving, is because they just want to be left alone and just to be, but you saw this leadership in them that was just like, it was incredible to find them and then to make the decisions of how they got them out. And I won't spoil it for people if you don't know, but they basically called a doctor friend who was a cave diver and said, "Can we do this?" And he's like, "You guys are effing crazy." Right? Like, there's no way we could. And then they did it. And you're just like, oh my God. Like, but to see that leadership of people who wanted nothing to do with being on a stage, more or less a world stage, that lives were hanging in children's lives were hanging in the balance, and them to make the leadership decisions they did on a whim, right? I mean, you just, it's incredible to do that, and they had that we're not going to fail kind of attitude with it, but they didn't have an ego, right? They were nothing about ego. In fact, even in the thing, he goes, the worst thing we ever did was say it's over. It was hopeless, right? We were shamed. They were shamed in saying that, right? That they thought that it was going to be hopeless, and it was just incredible the kind of what they found, and that leads. It's almost like we planned this, but it almost leads into my last kind of little lesson that I do, and that's control your own spam, right? And so for me, like a long time ago, I don't know, I heard it from somebody, but now I've always kept a can on my desk, right? And I ate it in Japan in Hawaii because they eat them all the time with seaweed and rice, but in what's called a musubi. But
Actually sounds pretty good.
It is really good, actually. But it's really good in the morning when you're going golfing. But what it really stands for, though, is it's sex, power, alcohol, and money, right? And so controlling your spam, I think, Powell talks about don't have an ego tied to your rank, because when your rank falls, your ego goes with it. And I think, look, you can, and you know this, right? When you became CEO, you didn't get any better looking than what you did before, right? Like that was it. You hit your peak. I hit my peak, before I became a CMC. So you end up with this, you're all alone, right? You're at the leadership position. There's a lot of power that rests within that, right? And people, if you don't control your alcohol, if you don't control not just money as in the sense of, but letting money go to your head, not just, doing the illegal things with it, and then obviously, sex, like, just, that's not what you're going to, you have that power. Doesn't mean you need to abuse it in any way, shape, or form. But if you control those things, I think when people go, that can't happen to me, you have to actively make sure that you're putting things in measures, in my opinion, to make sure that happens, whether that's through faith, whether that's through whatever you do, right? Make sure you're putting those measures in, that your ego doesn't get too big, that you learn about self-deception, you learn about what the power can do to you and how it's corrupted others, right? And know that that's happened. Understand that, drugs and alcohol are absolutely prevalent in those kind of things, and what those make you end up doing, right? Or what it can lead to, or, like you said, you're on camera 24/7 now. So now all of a sudden, right, people just, we just saw that with a now ex-fired coach from Jacksonville who got caught on camera, and so you're like, okay, it's like that. And what do those things lead? So you got to control your spam. And I don't hide from it. That's the other thing, right? Some people are like, oh, I don't want to talk about those things, but I think you need to, because the more you openly talk and go, I actively control that stuff, I think the more people are going, it's transparency, right? It makes it so you can't go back and go, oh, well, you've said it. You've talked about, hey, I only have one drink at an office party, or I'm only ever going to have one drink, and if you see me with more, knock it out of my hands. If you, that's not, to me, that's a leader. To me, that's a person coming around and going, I just want you all to know I'm going to do this so I control myself, because I'm trying to set the example for everybody else in every way that I live. And so that controlling spam added to the other two, I think it ends up being a basic, right? It's a basic thing that can control, that can take over. And I think when you control it and you make sure that it stays in check and you put in active things, I think, you end up being a great leader because of that.
Yeah, and I do really appreciate that, because what do you say? So spam, sex, power, alcohol, and money, right?
Yeah.
Because those are the monsters in the room, right? Those are the things that now integrity comes into play, right? Because now, like you said, you've got a position of power. Um, and I guess if we look at all the negative headlines and leadership that we've seen, right? Like, how much have we seen the last 2 decades of an abuse of power sexually, whether it was Hollywood or in politics or whatever? The abuse of power is in what you get away with, alcohol and money. Yeah, I mean, I love the fact you're talking about we need to talk, because again, I think, a lot of the feedback I've gotten on this podcast, as an example, why I love doing it, is that these conversations are being had about the positives, like wanting to do more, having had trials and tribulations to get and have success or improve ourselves or whatever. Like, we're talking about that, and it brings it down to earth. It makes it attainable. And I think talking about even the other side, like, hey, this is what can happen. This is, and it kind of also setting and talking about the examples that you want to avoid, right? Like, we're setting examples on what can be, for your potential and these lessons learned and paying them forward and all that. But there's also lessons to be learned in the dark side, and you
Absolutely.
see that. And I think it's great to talk about them. And to your point, you're talking about earlier, like coming up in the 90s, and you, like, this stuff wasn't talked about,
but everybody knew it was going on.
Sure. Yeah.
Everybody knew it. Nobody talked about it. And then all of a sudden it started to become, Me Too happened, all the stuff that happened in Hollywood, like you talked about. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute. Right. So it was a really good example. I remember I was at East, no, I think I was a senior chief at the time. And in the mess, so the whole chief's mess in the entire United States, the lead person is the MIG-POG. Like you guys have the sergeant major of the Marine Corps, right? We have the Master Chief Petty Officer of Navy. And they sent through the ranks, they sent an email out to the entire mess and they said, hey, what has contributed to the chief's behaviors and some of the high profile things? What contributed to that stopping over the last, or what contributed to its decrease over the past 48 months, whatever it was? And they wanted to know what the mess thought it was. And so me being me, I'm like, I'm going to write something. I was all into it at this point in time and whatever. So I wrote something, and my CMC, bless his heart, sent it to the big guy, and it went straight to him. It went to his executive aide, which was another Master Chief. And he wrote me back and he said, Flip, he said, dude, he said, we've gotten 50 responses. And he said, this is the most, and I kept it in one of my books as an email that I kept forever. He said, this is one of the most, most comprehensive responses and probably spot ons what we had. And I said, and nobody, I don't think anybody connected the dots, but I think I had done that. We had a lot of sexual assault prevention training probably in that time frame, the 2 years prior to that, right? And people, and you remember, you get when the military picks up on a subject that they need to hammer out, and they inundate you, and for great reasons for it, right? There was absolutely reasons, right? Sexual assault's absolutely horrible, and it no place, right? But what it was doing, it was talking about responsible behaviors, not only about helping someone out in a situation, but it was talking about, about keeping people out of those situations and avoiding them through not keeping someone sober, or making sure that you were with a group of people, or making sure. So it was promoting more ideas than just don't sexually assault someone, right? Like that was obviously the name of it. It was sexual assault prevention training, but it was promoting a bunch of other good values that we were trying to have kind of ingrained in. And at the same time, we were promoting leadership at lower ranks. So instead of just keeping this leadership bubble of the chiefs that we had had started to open it up to the first classes. So before they got there, and it wasn't a secret anymore, they were understanding at least. But when you get here, it's not about wearing, walking around with an anchor on and being like, oh, I'm the chief, I could do what I want. It wasn't about that. At least not the good ways it wasn't. It was more about, it was a way of acting all the time. It was knowing that these things they're going to get to you, right? I mean, people are people. Humans are humans. There's a lot of things I boil down to human nature, and it's going to happen. And that's why I think actively promoting not only that you're thinking about it, but the dark thing. You brought up a great point, man. How many bad leadership lessons have you learned and took on board and not done because of that lesson that you saw someone else do? I think that gets overglossed, and we don't want to talk about and put people on Front Street that they did it. But man, dude, I learned a lot from bad leaders that I was like, I'm never going to do that, right? I'm never going to do that. And it wasn't always, here's the key to that. Once I got into the shoes, I usually saw that lesson, that what I thought was very bad, in a little bit different light. It might still have been negative, but it might not have been as bad, because I was looking at it from a different lens and being like, well, I'm in those shoes now. Hold on. It's still not good, but now I know how it looks like and what it looked like to myself as a junior and what it's going to look like if I do it. And so I just thought it was something that, for me and my leadership lessons, it was something that I was like, man, you got to be open about it. You got to be willing to talk about it. And you got to be willing to learn from them and share, like you talked about.
Yeah. I mean, it goes to, one of my philosophies is, the power of setting the example. And
absolutely.
And that and there's leadership. And I kind of these days talk about leadership and also talk about influence. And leadership is, like, I'll say, having direct responsibility, direct leadership, like a direct report, right? Direct influence. Influence is an indirect form of leadership, right? So leadership is a direct form of influence. Influence is an indirect form of leadership, meaning you can influence someone even though you aren't responsible for them, directing them, whatever.
Absolutely.
And this is where setting the example has equal power in both of those areas, right? You see all these athletes, super movie stars, whatever, do wrong, right? They do something, they cheat, they infidelity, drugs, whatever. And people get so upset about it. It's because of that influence factor. Like people, they were an indirect leader, and sometimes maybe for the wrong reasons, but they set up an aspirational influence that people admire, they're looking up to, much the same that they look up to leaders who have a direct influence of them, because if they've got the authority, they've got the guidance, they're given direction. And I agree, like that's where the power of setting the example. People can set a good example, they can set a bad example, and you've got to be on the lookout for examples, right? And that's going to be the example of what not to do just as much as it is the example of what to do. And I caution people all the time, like to the point where they get all upset, for these major names, and they find out there's some secret, that they were doing wrong or whatever, and they get all upset. It's like, well, I get you, but you let their influence over you go too far, right? You admired them because they are a pro athlete. You weren't necessarily admiring them for their home character,
Right.
right? You didn't see that. You actually filled that in. You thought because they're a great pro basketball, baseball, golf, whatever, that all of a sudden everything else in their life must be as of equal level, prestige, but it's not. And I think, that's where we've got to know, like to not maybe put them on the right pedestals, and like
Yeah.
be cautious of what else is going on. And that way you don't get, I don't get all hyped up, about like I say, it's a guy you admired for his basketball skills. You find out he's beating his wife, and now you get all upset about it. Like he broke your heart, and you're right. But I never put him on that, like on that pedestal. You
Right.
understand? Like,
Keep him for what he was, right? If you like
yeah,
Michael Jackson and his music, right? Great. Don't well then it's the debate, can you still listen to Michael Jackson or, whatever because of what the allegations were?
right,
If
sure,
if that's it or whatever. But here's the thing about America, right? And here's the thing about people. And I think this is the best part, right? Everybody's going like what, like the darkest stars, the brightest stars have the darkest trails, right? Like this goes into my like my kind of my faith and what my spiritual beliefs of things, and like I start looking at the yin yang, and I think like Taoism and Daoism and how everything is balanced, and I think I don't, for you and I consider myself a very average person. I really do. Like in the whole scheme of things, I think I'm average. And when I say that, I don't mean it necessarily that I have a bigger house, a smaller house. I don't mean it in that sense. I just mean it in the sense of saying like, look, I don't, I think most people, when they're extreme on one end, there's an extreme on the other that has to counterbalance that out, right? Like read Relentless, and it's a great book by about from Glover about Michael Jordan, and or Tiger Woods story, right? You just read how so passionate they had no other outlets to do, and so you end up if I don't have that, what do I end up doing, right? A great example in the media that you do see, I think Howard Stern, and think what you want, but he is the way he does what we're doing right now is his therapy of being so right, and so his way to do it is to talk through it out and everything else. And he talks about going to a therapist twice a week, to also talk things out. And that's the way he balances kind of his kind of craziness with his normalization, and he normalizes his life. And so I think that in itself has to be, everybody's got to find their balance of what it is, because everybody has quirks, right? whether you're normal and you have just a little quirk one way and then a little, maybe you have some success and then you're like, oh, there's a couple of things that I wish I would did better in my life, or, but I think you can balance it. And look, Dale, you know this. America forgives, dude. Right? Like we'll just, I screwed up. And this is the kind of leadership lesson, right? I screwed up. I take that on myself. I owned it and I want to make myself better. Right. I think that's, you talk about, look at Kobe, right? He had the thing happen in Colorado and he apologized, and look what happened when, he tragically passed away. People came out of the woodwork, and I didn't realize when that happened, I had emulated. Michael was my guy growing up. Jordan was. I mean, I had the Bull starter jacket, right? I had the kit. Like that was it, man. And so, but I saw a new generation of people who were not even in basketball being that and going, okay, we forgave. He took it on himself, and then he did something with it. And I think as a leader, you're gonna make a mistake. We all make mistakes, man. I mean, nobody's perfect. We're never gonna be that way. And so, hey, I effed it up. I own it. I'm sorry, and I'm gonna do everything I can to fix it, right? Because then it doesn't become a failure, right? Look at how
I was thinking this earlier when you're talking about failure, and I was going to say then, but I'll say it now, which is like they'll forget your failures fast, so long as you call it for what it is, acknowledge the lessons learned, and start working on the next success. Right? Like think about it. Like you use Edison as an example. No one remembers Edison for his 999 failures. They remember him for his one success. So we'll forget failures fast so long as you get back to work, and maybe that's what you're saying here with the Kobe thing. Cause I remember that was what was that 2000s, 90, whatever happened. But there was some serious stuff that went down.
Yeah.
But, look at him now. But I think that was from, like you said, and that, like I was saying too earlier, right? Like when we double down, like, and we go, they let that ego lead the drive. Like, no, like denial, keeping the lie alive. Like think Clinton, right? Like keep the lie alive. And
he has a master class now. He has a master class on leadership, no doubt.
But right. So, but there's the best thing you could do when things are off track is find the shortest path to get back on track. And often when you make mistakes, own it. Own the fact that it's a mistake. And get back on that track, and then to demonstrate that you have learned that lesson, right? If you screw up, you're right. I screwed up. I shouldn't have done that. I recognize I was wrong. This is what I've learned from it. And now go demonstrate that, because your words are cheap,
Sure.
Your words are cheap. Now go demonstrate that you've learned something, and it'll be gone. Well, now we're focused on your next success.
And to me, I go, if I'm way out there on something that I had made a mistake on, and I think this is where this all three of the things tie in, right? Is that you just end up going, okay, what am I going to fall back on? All right, I'm going to fall back on the basics of my leadership that I'm going to do good at. How do I gain trust back? It's by doing right. It's by making sure that the basics things that I've built it upon. Yes, I made a mistake. I did something, whatever that was. I got drunk and whatever. I at a office party, and I said something stupid on a microphone. You know what? I'm going to apologize in front of everybody. I'm going to own it. Not to say that I did that, but I'm just saying, right? And then all of a sudden you go, okay, I'm going to go back to the basics that you guys knew and you guys were with me before on. I'm going to go back to that because I apologize for you guys for getting like that. I shouldn't have. People go, yeah, okay, we've all done that. Like nobody's, because everybody knows, right? Everybody knows. I don't care what you do. You close your door to your house, dude, and nobody's throwing stones, right? I mean, because you're just like, wait a minute, okay. Really look at it and go, well, all right, we've done that too, right? And so, and I guess that's my, I know we've been a while, but my, I always say, right, and this is my, I had to make my own. Everybody used to put like everybody else's at the bottom of their emails. They used to always put, everybody else's, sayings, whatever those were. And so I was like, I had 7 months off between jobs over the summer. I was looking for I'd kind of was in between. I'm like, I have to have one for myself. What have I learned over the time where I can put it into one sentence? And I still say, and this is what I believe that honesty, consistency, and transparency from the top down 100% builds trust, loyalty, and respect from the bottom up. I think that when you're going on that ladder both ways, I think when you can be honest, consistent, and transparent, I think then what you're not going to get it right away, but you just, and that's why it's builds, you're building that trust, that loyalty, and that respect from people. And when you make the mistakes like we just talked about with spam, and you don't control it, great. Then guess what? Own it, apologize, and do better, right? I mean, that's about as best you can do.
And I guess to your point about the power of consistency, right? Like, don't be consistently digging in the spam bucket.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when you do it once, you do it again. You're like, wait a minute, hold
Yeah.
on, dude. Like you didn't. And there's some things, right? And there's some things as leaders. I made this mistake, man, and I'm sure you did. I had a leader who dude, I was trying to be him, right? I was trying to be him, and I didn't. Again, I wasn't in his shoes. This is why I say when I got to his shoes, I saw it in a very different light, and what I thought was negative wasn't negative, right? It was more. I mean, there was some, and there's sometimes as leaders you don't. It's sometimes a mistake-free zone, right? You don't get a second chance. There's some things you can do within that spam world. Sorry, dude, that you lost it, right? You absolutely did, and there's no coming back from those. Sometimes, at least not in the same spot, and it may take a while. And sometimes never, right? Sometimes they're just that bad, and that happens, whatever. But the thing is that you got to be willing to be able to say, okay, I screwed up, own it, and then move on from it, because it's not always, like I said, because here's the thing, you've been there, right? Your newest hire when you were a CEO had no idea the capacity you ran at or what your responsibilities were as a CEO. And guess what? He or she didn't give a shit. They didn't care what you did. All they cared about is they came to work, they got their paycheck, they went home. And as they started moving on, they started building towards the team, and they got into that whole thing. And then now it was a purpose, right? It became that as it done. So you're right, but doesn't matter. Like, they're going to go home and did I do the right thing? And you got to be able to do the same.
Yeah, and I think to your point, we were talking earlier about like what failure due to neglect and all that. I think to your point, that kind of speaks to what you're saying. Like, if you're the general and you should have known better. No, really, you should have known better. Mistakes like those are irrecoverable, right? Like
Right.
it's unbecoming, right?
Right.
Those are, and I think rightfully so. Like to your point, like when you're when you're at a level where you know you make these junior grade mistakes, let's say, and you're at this pay grade, and it's like, hey, guy, you're at a level that this isn't tolerable. It isn't
Yeah.
acceptable.
I mean, even Powell will tell you he made the mistake, and he to the day he died, he was regretful over, going to the UN and saying what he said, right? And in that respect, he was like, man, I made that mistake. But look, he owned it. Petraeus owned it, right? I screwed up, and now, right, he's a prominent, he's prominent in that thing, because you still have a lot to give, but you got to own it, right? You got to own it.
Yeah, and you got to recognize as a leader, and as you look at leaders and influencers, like we are all perfectly human, right?
Yeah.
So if you're expecting perfection, you're going to get let down every single time. As a leader, as an admirer, follower, influenced, whatever, like. And I think we have to like give all ourselves that grace, that recognize that we're just perfectly human. We're going to make mistakes, and to your point, like if we're not learning from it, that is the mistake. So cool, man. Well, let's wrap this up because we're gonna hop
Yeah,
back on
brother.
another time. But so what are you working on? What are you working on these days?
Yeah, so working for a great company, and we're doing some cool things in the reality capture world, which is fun, and kind of working as I'm a VP of strategy and innovation, which really means that I get to have my head in the clouds and look for what we're going to do, right, and help the boss out, but really helping more with being his kind of chief executive advisor, if you will, right, and really helping him out. It's a smaller company, and so I'm really kind of helping him with what we've been talking about, right? Having been down that road, and having now to start to deal with, as we start with growth, some of that stuff, and so being able to do that, which is it's fun, right? It's kind of like us. when you're an ER doctor and you want to teach things, you still need to be in the ER all the time to does it work? Yeah. Is what I'm telling you, over our podcast good? Yeah, I can prove it because it's work. I'm working on it right now,
Yeah.
in actionable things with things. So that's always fun. And then hopefully this summer I'm going to finish. I'm going to find the time, grind it out as it is, but I'm going to have my K.I.S.S leadership book out, in the summer. So my hope is to get it out there, and to kind of have it, whether it comes out in a manual or it comes out in a full thing. I want to be able to put that out because I think, like I've talked to you before about it, and I think it's important. I think the everyday person, who is a leader, and I think everybody can be this. Not it doesn't need you don't have to have stars on your lapel. You don't have to have a CEO title. It doesn't need any of that stuff. You can be, and you and I have said this before. I think that the Home Depot shift manager at Home Depot has more power and influence over people, than the CEO of Home Depot, right? Like if you think about it in some respects, like the CEO of Home Depot isn't telling you that you have to come to work on the weekend, but that shift manager is. So those people, in my eyes, need to know how to simple leadership, right? They need to know how to keep it simple, and they need to know how to avoid the spam, and knowing that not to fail. And when you have that, I think that's what the book's really all about is simplicity, and making sure that it's at the lowest levels and everybody can handle it. So,
Yeah.
but those couple things, yeah. And then maybe, I don't know, maybe this chemistry is good, and then maybe this is what we're working on. We'll have to see.
Yeah, man. Plenty of leadership development work in progress, man. So yeah,
Yeah,
dude, it's been an honor to have you on. I'm glad we finally got this on a schedule and got it on the book. So appreciate you having it on, man. And I'm looking forward to doing some more work with you.
absolutely, Joe. Thanks, brother. Glad to
All
be
right.
on.
Thank you. Yep. Talk soon.
Yep.